Content warning. This episode discusses child sexual abuse and contains explicit descriptions of trauma. It gets pretty heavy, but it lands with an important message and a small but practical action for you to take away, so please stick around to hear it. Hello, thank you for joining me. This is T, coming to you with the first ever episode of Notes from the Borderline. I'm going to level with you here. I have written and rewritten scripts for a first episode for this podcast more times than I would like to admit, so I'm coming to this feeling already a little bit tired. Tired of trying to find ways to package and represent my experiences as a survivor of organised sexual violence in ways which are going to make people willing to hear about it. I'm even tired of the need that I feel within myself for other people to hear about it and to believe it and to want to do something about it. And yet still, the need persists, and it isn't going anywhere because it is profoundly human. Trauma researchers like Judith Herman have long recognised that survivors need to narrativise our experiences in front of witnesses. It's part of how we heal from what was done to us. It's not self-indulgence, it isn't pathology, it's perfectly healthy, perfectly normal, perfectly justified, perfectly valid. This week, we all have been bombarded with news about the recent release of more of the Epstein files, and all of us, I know, are feeling enraged, depleted, and exhausted just from thinking about it. For some people, a minority of fortunate people, this will be the first time they have been forced to fully confront and come to terms with the stark reality of sexual violence in our society, with the depths of depravity to which our most powerful financial and political classes have succumbed. Of course, many others will know that this is just the tip of the iceberg, and that none of it is separate from the violence which has characterised our societies for a very long time. Now, not only do we have to come to terms with the genocidal violence we have been forced to witness directly unfolding over the last few years on screen, and the ongoing, indeed worsening violence against marginalised minority groups at home, but also the violence perpetrated by white men against their own most vulnerable groups. Children, teens, young girls, preyed upon by civilised men in business suits, the very same people who have used their political power to engineer chaos in our economies and fragmentation across civil society. My gosh, who knew? It's been 15 years since Virginia Giuffre first bravely spoke out as a survivor of Epstein's trafficking. She was not believed. She was accused of lying for all sorts of reasons. She is now dead, and what we have left of her is a memoir with the title Nobody's Girl. Nobody's Girl. Let those words sink in. I admit, I have only recently ordered a copy for myself. I have not yet read it, but I do know that it details a lifetime of abuse from childhood beginning within her own family. That this was the reason she was homeless for a while before she found herself working in a job where she was trafficked, the reason she was left out in the cold with no one to claim her as their own, as someone who belonged and was worthy of their protection. There are too many survivors like Virginia's, and the truth is, we kind of freaking know it already. In fact, we know it so well it's almost a cliche, isn't it? That's certainly how I've felt with hindsight, as I have looked back on the trajectory of my own life, ever since finally having the safety to fully process all of the things which happened to me in my earliest years. I can almost feel it in the looks I remember passed between people as I walked around, apparently half blind, dare I say it, naive almost to the point of stupidity, still trusting in the ideals of truth and of justice, still trusting in all the wrong kinds of men, in a world that I honest to God think was half expecting me to one day roll over and die, quietly, face flat on the ground, in a ditch or in an alley somewhere. For some time, I also thought that I might well end up this way. In fact, I very nearly did. But I knew next to nothing of the real reasons why, of which I was still in denial, next to everyone else. That was before I reprocessed the memories and fully understood what was indeed actually to blame for all of my so-called personality difficulties. Prior to that, I had spent hours in locals therapy with a man, combing over and over all of the possible reasons I might have made the allegations I did as a child, why I might have made it all up, or had an exaggerated response, or said it because I was vindictive and jealous of my brother, or just straightforwardly been looking for attention I wasn't otherwise getting. My amnesia wasn't seen as the sign of severe trauma that it really was. It was seen as evidence that nothing significant had really happened. Meanwhile, my father's assertions that I had been sick in the head, or dreaming it all up, or that the ideas had been put into my head by somebody else, trumped all of the evidence that suggested that the opposite was the case, that he had been a violent and deeply manipulative man. Since realising that I was in fact not a vengeful and jealous little girl or a horrible little brat, as I once had been led to believe, but was rather an innocent child who had been repeatedly abused by pretty much every adult person in my life who was meant to protect me, my attitude towards the possibility of my own suicide has somewhat changed. Since then, it has been far more along the lines of, let's see, not a fucking chance, ain't gonna happen, I am not gonna give them the satisfaction. And that isn't to say that I don't still have days where the solution doesn't feel slightly tempting. But the fact is, I'm not about to leave a scene behind that can be neatly filed away as a suicide on anyone's record, because as far as I'm concerned, every person who dies in the aftermath of this kind of abuse has been the victim of murder, and I refuse to allow them to take the life that I have a right to away from me, at least not so easily. I will not go quietly, will not allow my truth to be buried in his false narrative, will not live trapped in the secret shadows of a society that refuses to face itself for what it really is. With that said, I should probably offer another trigger warning, as the next few paragraphs contain some details of the abuse that I suffered. I was raped for the first time when I was just 5 years old by my own father, a thoroughly charming, so-called well-educated and respected man. During that same year, I was raped for the first time also by another man I cannot name, but who lived nearby and sat on the local church council where my father was a vicar. This pattern of new people becoming involved continued over the next few years and included some women. It included throughout social services involvement and the family courts. The rapes my father committed on our visits did not stop until I was 13, 3 years after the courts had decided my father was not guilty, and that if anything was happening at all, that it must have only been mild, whatever that even means. For some time, I have also had to come to terms with memories which implicate my father in the abuse of other children, both within the church and in events organised by my other perpetrators, which took place on private lands that they owned. All of which took place in between the year when my father was first reported by another child witness for sexually abusing my brother in 2003 and the year the investigation was concluded in 2007. This all took place in one of the wealthiest postcodes in the country, perpetrated by people who attended church every single Sunday. It was after the court case had been concluded, and after I had withdrawn my own allegations as a result of the involvement of abusers and enablers in supervising the child protection process, at 10 years old, that I faced my father and one of these abusers alone and threatened to speak up again. In retaliation, my father chased me down and held my head underwater repeatedly and threatened to kill me if I did. In the midst of all this, with all the lessons I had been taught in how to deal with males, with all that my body knew, I had also been, quote-unquote, getting myself into a lot of trouble with other adolescent males in the area where I lived with my mother in one of the most deprived postcodes in the country. This went on until, by the time I reached 11, a group of these young lads knew enough about my vulnerabilities to organise me as their own entertainment. On one of these nights, when I was 11 years old, I witnessed these young men discuss amongst themselves how they, quote, could not understand where I had gotten it from, referring to my precocious sexuality, with such a posh, such an obviously sexually innocent mother, and concluded that I, quote, must have been born gagging for it, like some girls are. I am not going to drown you in any more horrifying details or stories, there are plenty, but at least some of the facts do have to be stated to express how deeply entrenched and widespread this issue is. To show that, contrary to what was thought of me at the time, there were good reasons why I wanted to die when I was just 7 years old. Good reasons why I myself, at 12 years old, was reading a book alone in my room called Nobody's Child, another survivor's memoir, and all I could do was to cry. That there were good reasons why I almost drank myself to death after turning 14, why I cut my own wrists to the point of bleeding, why I once believed the devil lived inside of me, why I supposedly foolishly and totally unnecessarily, as my teacher would tell you, dramatically ran out of every dance class I had, panicked and in tears because the thought of being visible in my own body was enough to make me sick. To make it clear that no, I wasn't doing any of the fucked up things I was doing because I was sensitive, or because I was just doing it for some lad, as one paramedic suggested, almost laughing as he did. And that when I did turn to modelling, making myself into an object for the camera, I wasn't doing it because I was shallow or vain, but was following a path that had been carved out for me, or perhaps I should say into me, by men long before I was old enough to understand what I was doing. You know, in the earlier draft scripts I wrote for this episode, I didn't talk about any of these things. I talked about the economy. I talked about how it commodifies, objectifies, creates hierarchies of power, and reduces our relationships to transactions of exchange. I talked about the violent history of land dispossession, which is the basis of the society we live in today, and the privileges my first abusers had. I talked about the witch hunts across Europe that consolidated control over women's bodies. I talked about the history of human settlement and wealth concentration and divisions of labour between men and women. I even talked about paternal and communal childcare as being part of the antidote to the rampant misogyny and absence of empathy we are facing. And all of those things are important and need to be said. But then here I am, circling back around again to the thing that first brought me to writing from where I stand, at the borderlines, rather than anywhere near any sort of centre with any platform or community where people are going to listen and want to hear what I have to say in the first place. Because the truth is that, aside from other survivors, few people want to hear about it, not even the people who have empathy. Because it isn't neat, it isn't packageable, it isn't distant or academic or ideological enough for them to swallow, and because it's painful to hear. People do not have a tolerance for hearing about the horrors which shape the lives of those who have experienced such realities, right here, next door, and not somewhere far away over there. And no, I won't pretend that we are the only group in society who knows a little of what that feels like, whose pain is not properly mirrored or is uncomfortable to hear about. Talk to any other marginalised or oppressed group of people and you will hear the same sort of thing. But perhaps what separates their struggle from survivors of this type of violence is that they don't belong to nobody. They belong to each other, even when they've been cast out by the broader community. Survivors, in contrast, are very often scattered and isolated. We lack that sense of belonging, and pathways don't really exist to find others nearby who share our experiences. Even if we do, many of us are too disabled by the trauma itself to show up consistently, to organise in traditional ways. We lack visibility and representation, people don't often understand us, and our presence is not welcome in the communities where relational healing and accountability need to happen, at least not when we are vocal about the things which really have happened. Most movements are built around identities, and ours are often fragmented. So what does organising look like for us? And where and with whom do we do it? The truth is, we know a lot about the weight of surviving isolation while carrying the heavy burdens brought with us from the places and the people we have escaped. We carry histories in our bodies, histories which we are willing to name rather than to silently bury. But the ones we love most and are attached to aren't the ones standing by our side shouting with us, they are the ones we are forced to have to name. So we know about the holes in the narratives which claim that community with a capital C is all we really need to heal, or that all we need to do is to join in other fights that already exist and are pushing for change. Communities, families, these are the systems which scapegoated us in the first place, which often left us behind. Each and every one of them a site in which collectives stand together against their enemies, refusing to turn and look within, where charismatic abusers make themselves essential, where performance trumps messy integrity and uncomfortable truths about those who walk amongst us, and where the vulnerable who can't keep pace, or those who don't follow the script well enough, are the ones who are quietly left behind. Same story, no matter which tribe. I guarantee you, the man who raped me 2 years ago, who calls himself a feminist and claims that he wants to abolish gender, is stood in some local community or tenants meeting right now with his fellow comrades, rebuking the billionaire class in all their depravity. My father is somewhere talking with parishioners about Trump's vile and utter hypocrisy and what it is doing to his home country. Perhaps one of the lads who gang raped me in childhood is frothing at the mouth as he reads about immigrants on Facebook coming over here to hurt our women and children. But then all I can think about is how I've spent so much time trying to zoom out and look at things from a broader perspective, to see the whole picture, that I often am taken aback when the memories resurface again in all their painful vividness, and I am left with the microarchitecture of violence and how it shaped my perpetrators' own everyday lives. In one memory I see unmet shadows and repressed sexual shame, broken relationships with their own fathers. In another I see young males using alcohol as a crutch, incapable of talking about their feelings, who learned about sex from porn, and who know nothing about how to empathise with females. I see total and complete dissociation from themselves, as well as others. And among the women in their lives, I see complicity and silence, I see lies, I see performance, and I see deep-rooted fear, woven into the fabric of their DNA. I made multiple attempts in some shape or form to return to communities which harmed me over the last couple of years, thinking maybe the harms I experienced could be recognised as part of a larger pattern, not to redeem anyone, but to break the cycle collectively. Thinking if the criminal justice system couldn't possibly deliver justice for me, and even if it could, perhaps for one individual perpetrator, certainly not for the full scale, that some other path had to exist. But some truths are too heavy to face, and as many survivors know and have told me themselves, often trying only risks the sense of safety we've been fighting to try and build for ourselves in the first place. The truth is that we all are going to have to claw our way back to humanity once we've processed all of this, to dignity and to freedom and to respect, and that is going to take time and it's going to require a lot more than rage, even if anger is absolutely crucial for responding and for motivating us to fight for real change. But in the meantime, I can almost guarantee you there is a survivor somewhere near you who needs to hear a few things if you are willing to say them. Like, you are not nobodies, you were never nobodies, you are your own and you are one of us too. Like, I'm listening, I believe you, like, we need you alive if things are ever going to actually change. Now, these are only notes. I didn't come to this table prepared with neat arguments or conclusions, so instead of those, I'm going to leave you with two things, the latter of which I hope will land this on a more hopeful note than it started. The first is an invitation to join me again when I return with more notes from the borderline, whenever that may be, and the second is a poem, because I am a poet, and poetry, in my experience, is a powerful tool for kindling fire. Admittedly, this one I wrote more to kindle my own fire more than anyone else's, but sometimes we need that shit. It's called My Revenge Will Be My Life, and it goes like this. My revenge will be my passion, my revenge will be my love, my vengeance taken rising from the ashes, taken lighting up the dark. My revenge will not be glory, will not be riches, titles, clothes. My revenge will be in taking stand against the violence that they show. My revenge will not take pity, will not let go, will not forgive, even if it sees in perpetrators victims chained within. My revenge will be relentless, my revenge will be my hope. My revenge will not be shaken, not by sadness, grief, nor woe. My revenge will be my laughter, my revenge will be to dance. My revenge will be to take up this much space and to be loud. My revenge will not be prideful, neither boastful, meek, nor tamed. My revenge, though tender loving, will be savage, unafraid. My revenge will be my strength, my revenge will be this voice, my revenge will be a witness to many others tell their stories. My revenge will not stop here, it will not end with any rhyme. My revenge will follow morning, my revenge will be my life. Thank you for hearing me. Love, T. If this resonated with you, please like, follow and share. I'll be back with more notes from the borderline soon.